first of all, before I actually share my screen, I just wanted to welcome everyone to our InfoLit Working Group webinar. One of the things that this group is doing is working within the USG and some of our Galileo resources to create a professional development series. We've been working on this for a while, and you might remember that we had one about backwards design back late last fall. And that was a great experience, and we hope to do more, but there was a pandemic. So that's a little bit about what we're talking about today. And again, like part of the purpose of this group is really to draw on our institutional practices and institutional knowledge and kind of come together and really just figure out what everybody else is doing and see what works for our own libraries and share information, share knowledge, and just kind of learn from each other, as well as stay in keeping with some of the university systems steps towards information literacy and advocate for continued development and continued presence of information literacy where we can have our influence. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about some of the results from the survey, and then everybody else will get started. So let me bring up my magical PowerPoint. And all right, so what we have here, it might look a little messy, but really the point of today's webinar, and we actually hope to have a few more like this in the future, is really just what our information literacy has been like in our library system and our libraries together. So can everybody see the PowerPoint? Could somebody let me know if they see it?
Yeah. Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right. So our speakers today, I'm doing the introduction, and then we have Jessica Osborne and Betsy Fleming at Georgia Highlands to talk about their experiences, Amanda Nash and Angela McGaw at UNG, and then Christina Holm will be talking about future directions. And finally, Julius will close us out with some of the administrative things and some of the other bigger vision and higher level discussion points that we started this group working with and why it still relates in a pandemic sort of situation. So, and if you remember during the registration form last week, two of the questions we really wanted to know from our librarian partners across the USG is really what's been going on. And, the two questions we asked were, what has been your biggest challenge during COVID-19 as it relates to InfoLit and library instruction? And then what has information looked like at your institutions since COVID-19? And that is, the second question is much broader. And I'll talk about the results, and hopefully my super sophisticated pie chart shows us. There were about 55 results or 55 answers to this. A few people had everything canceled. That was about 8%. Some of you said that you had more sessions scheduled. Some of you said, about a third of you said that there was roughly the same as your information literacy, and then there were some cancellations were more than half of the results. And of course, I understand, like even at Valdosta State, there was a huge range of how I'm sure I would answer the questions, and some of my colleagues might answer the question, because part of this is, there was, I don't know about most of you, but for us, library instruction tends to dry up around March and then just kind of trickles out. But we did have several cancellations. We had a couple things stay, but it was pretty empty. And so there was kind of a continuation. I think we had some extra requests for other things, but so these are the kinds of things that we're really thinking about. And we wanted to sort of start looking at this, but also we'll continue to look at some of these answers and some of these conversation topics as we think about how we can continue our outreach and continue working with communicating information literacy to faculty and students. So, and then please excuse my wall of text. But the biggest challenges, this was the part where I wanted to, well, the webinar committee wanted to hear from everybody who was participating, because we really wanted to hear what was going on in sort of the more I guess, the effective domain really of the information or the impact of COVID-19 on information literacy. And the points on the left are the 5 categories of the types of responses. I went through all the results and I just kind of coded them with a super basic content analysis approach. And really, people did talk a lot about how difficult it was to transition to online learning. And there are lots of different ways that is challenging. Several people expressed a serious concern about the digital divide. We know this. It's important to talk about how, it is a struggle to teach online, but we also need to, and everybody does acknowledge that not all students had regular access to bandwidth or data or all sorts of other things. And even for me, I'm using a MiFi to get online and maintain a reasonable internet connection. There's a lot of opportunities for professional discussion, and that included networking with our faculty partners across our institutions, and just communicating the importance of information literacy. But since many of them were struggling to learn how to teach online, that was a struggle for them to kind of also keep space in their heads and in their syllabi for information literacy instruction. And so we have to keep all these things in mind, and that was a big struggle for some people. Planning for fall is something that's a huge issue. There are plenty of memes about this. I'm sure we've all had a dark chuckle about them. I think Christina is going to address a lot of the range of issues in this also. And finally, there's all sorts of different types of things, like how do we plan for our resources? How do we change, the kinds of course reserves and making all sorts of things online that might not have been online. So there's a whole range of things that we were talking about, and on the right is just a selection of some of the responses that I thought really kind of crystallized the points that a lot of you were making. And I thank you for really illustrating some of these so well and so concisely. But anyway, so again, thank you for contributing to this, and hopefully we'll be able to develop and build on these topics soon. So I think that kind of wraps up the introduction, and I look forward to hearing from the rest of our speakers today. And please remember to post any questions in the chat. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm moving over to Jessica having the hosting abilities. There you go.
And while Jessica is getting set up, well, I'll introduce myself. I'm Betsy Fleming from Georgia Highlands College, and Jessica is also from Georgia Highlands. And we're going to talk about give you a survey of what our kind of virtual space looks like and some of the insights we found. I'm frozen. Hold on one second, guys. I apologize. I do apologize, guys, for the technical difficulties. We've had it up, and I think that it just needed to refresh. Okay, here we go. I can see it. Good. That's good news. Okay, so as Betsy, told you, I'm Jessica Osborne, and I'm from Georgia Highlands. I'm the campus librarian at the Cartersville campus.
And we're going to talk to you today about My Library in D2L, a survey of the Georgia Highlands virtual library space. To start off, we're going to give you a little background. We're going to talk about how we use COVID as an opportunity, really, to move forward. And then we'll close up with what we actually did in My Library in D2L. So probably the background portion, probably in about January when we had our division meeting, we were looking at some of our necessary statistics, and we had moved into a survey phase. So we were taking a look at our FTEs and our response rates to reference interactions, and we really found out that, or we looked closer into the fact that our second largest FTE is our online enrollment. Now, that does encompass some students who do both, who may be enrolled in some face-to-face classes and some online classes. However, taking a really good look within, we knew we wanted to evaluate how we were serving these distance learners in a really equitable way. Were we offering virtual services and to this digital learning community? So we effectively wanted to take a temperature check and see how it stacked up against the rest of our face-to-face interactions. So we looked at how students were asking questions in particular. Before, in the past year, within the year of COVID, and especially in that time period.
So the thing, I thought it might be useful to start out with a baseline. So this is roughly spring semester from last year. And the main takeaway from this, and these are how students ask their questions. The main takeaway is overwhelmingly, they ask them in person. Chat's up there a little bit, but you can notice all sort of the blank fields, all some of our virtual stuff, lib answers, web conferencing, that's new, email. They're all really tiny. So that's just the baseline. That was last spring. If we move on to the semester of COVID-19, this is, that showed up differently. So January 1st to May 31st, it's actually in person is still really the main component. The spring semester, these students are really still asking their questions in person, but we start to see chat and email pick up there. If you notice at the, look at the table, that shows it a little better than the graphic. And then if we go even further and just look at the period when we were closed, March 16th to May 31st, this is when we all went home, or all started to work from home. And here we can see, this is where we really started to see that uptick in some of those services that students hadn't utilized before. And this really occurred without any really savvy marketing campaign on our part, other than just a generic, hey, we're online now, come visit us. Students independently sort of started to find us and find ways to contact us, especially if you look at the lib answers ticket, which was a really tiny proportion before, is now up to 13%. Chat's big, email's big, and things like that. So it's sort of, to me, a recognition that students found us when they needed us, but also we probably were missing some opportunities for contact there.
Correct. And so we look at this data, and we also can sort of extrapolate that maybe there is a need to market to that online community of distance learners about these tools, even though during the entire shutdown, they were able to find us that way. So we wanted to look sort of at our normal operating environment, and we looked at, some of the existing tools we offer, links to the library website and Galileo in the menu bar in D2L. These were some of the things we knew we wanted to pull into our virtual library space. Some librarians embed in classes and some don't. Betsy, do you want to speak a little bit about that?
Sure. We have sort of, when we end up in line, it's usually because an instructor request or based on a previous in-person relationship with instruction. So it's not really a unified system. It's kind of scattered and it depends specifically on the instructor. So some of us are embedded online classes, and it's just a simple chat box. It's more of a passive presence. We still rely on students to contact us. There are some of us out there that are more engaged with online content, and sometimes we'll do Zoom sessions, or and I'm still talking a little pre-pandemic, but I think that's starting to pick up in terms of the Zoom sessions. Some of us were involved with, grading discussion board posts and things like that. So we're kind of all across the board in little tiny corners of instruction, but it's not really, we're not there really as a unified front presenting information literacy online yet.
Yeah, so we knew that we needed a space that encompassed all of this and the physical library experience within a virtual domain to offer both during the COVID pandemic and after for our distance learners. So as I said before, COVID really was for us an opportunity to move us forward on some things that we had been looking closely at up to this point. Because the need was much more pressing that we move it forward at that time. So we developed the library space in D2L. D2L is our virtual learning platform, so it was already familiar to many students at Georgia Highlands, so it was not foreign in any way, and it was a natural extension. So my library in D2L, these are some of the objectives and just the content that you'll see inside my library in D2L. We really wanted to meet the students where they were. And many of us, almost the vast majority of us at Georgia Highlands have done some e-core work or e-campus work as librarians. And we were familiar with that model. So that was another natural marriage to bring in those concepts into this because we've seen it work effectively actually from the ground up. Every semester after drop add, students are enrolled in our course. It's actually the first course they see on their dashboard. It makes it very accessible to them and just front and center. The actual D2L shell, it includes a chat box, a search box, and then of course other links. We have a fantastic library of tutorial videos that one of our other academic librarians along with the marketing team came up with, and it lives there. And we're also building some modules to go in there as sort of orientation methods along with, and we're using LibWizard, to do that. There's a space in there for announcements. The announcements that go out are quarterly. We want to really, we want to communicate effectively with students, and sometimes oversaturation is not the best way. We also don't want to end up being just another piece of spam that they're receiving. So we are very intentional about our communication with the students, which we feel like is the best method. We try to link out instead of duplicating content. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. We have a homepage and a website that we're working on, and it has a number of great resources. So where we could, we absolutely linked out. And then a la the eCore USG model, we mimicked discussion boards, which again, students are familiar with this platform and they know how discussion boards work. It's a great method for them to contact us after hours, or also they can answer one another's questions in that format. So this is a snapshot of what our D2L shell looks like. You can see it's organized such that up at the top, we feel like this is the primary focus. If they're coming here, they might be looking for research. They're familiar with the Galileo search box. And then below are announcements that have gone out to them so they can reference those as well. To the right here, you'll notice that's where our links live. You can see our little video library lives in there, the link to it, as well as a link to the discussion boards and other items that they could get help with via links. We have the chat listed on the homepage, and beneath that our hours and some more contact information. This is in no way foreign to them. Again, just reiterating that it's a very natural platform for them.
And so I thought I'd mention our discussion boards, because this is really where we expect or hope that when students come to the page, that they'll interact with us via discussion boards. And we split it out. And so we've got a discussion board for each citation style, and we've got our research help discussion board. I also wanted to point out, we know as librarians, we get all sorts of questions, not library related questions. So we have one up there for technology where we linked out to ITS, but we know we get, sometimes I feel like at the desk, my job is mainly computer support. And then we have a testing center in the library, so we have a discussion board for there as well. And the way we work this is that we have, with the on work from home, we set up virtual chat shifts. So during each librarian's virtual chat shift, they're responsible for checking the D2L page as well to respond to any questions that come in. And we aim to respond to those in 24 business hours.
So our contact information is listed here. I'm not sure that we have any time for questions. I'll turn the hosting responsibilities back over to Julius and stop my share.
Great. I'm going to make Angela the host, but I do want to just point out we do have some time at the end for everyone to ask questions. So if you have them, you can either put them in chat or we'll get to it around the end. So Angela, you are now the host.
And I accidentally paused recording, so trying to hit the share screen. Let's see. There we go. So my name is Angela McGaw, and I'm a reference services librarian at the Dahlonega campus of UNG. And that photo was taken the last week we were at work. And we decided, since our pets tend to make guest appearances, just so you know, that's Nicholas. And I'm sitting right next to the bird feeder, and the squirrel Alice was just here. So he may or may not make an appearance.
And I'm Amanda Nash. That photo was taken from the new office or the new campus of the University of North Georgia, which is just 5 minutes down the road from the other Oakwood campus. So yeah, and I have a potential guest as well, my dog Bodie, and also we should have included a picture of my neighbor Steve, who is now mowing his yard. So I hope you all can hear me. If not, let me know and I'll try and talk over that. So of course that would be the day today. So all right, Angela, shall we get going? Okay. Dun, 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 Friday the 13th. Of course, we all get word about what's happening with the USG and us taking that 2-week pause to kind of regroup and get ready for online only instruction. And for us, one of those weeks was spring break. So we basically had 1 week where we knew everyone was still around, and then 1 week where some of us were going to be around to figure out how to make this work. And a little bit of history for our library instruction online at UNG. Before all of this happened, there wasn't a great deal of it. It was kind of bits and bobs as needed. Angela did a good bit of what was done with nursing students, but it was kind of a point of need thing. If a class was interested in doing something, we might host a Blackboard Collaborate session or put something together for them, but it was, the numbers were very, very small compared to our face-to-face instruction. So we went from not much to entirely in a 2-week period. The other challenge we were facing, like most of you were facing, is that we have a lot of our faculty who had never really used D2L before. If they had, it was not to teach a class. They might have used it for their promotion and tenure portfolios, or to do some of the mandatory HR trainings we have to do over the course of the year, but never to build a course and teach a course that way. And even if they weren't trying to, you know, follow best practices and do it perfect to get going, it was still a real hurdle for them. So our face-to-face courses and D2L, not perfect together. For one thing, this was strange to me when I came to what was then Gainesville State and now UNG. I had, in my face-to-face credit teaching experience, even though I was in the classroom, I always used our course management system to put together something with the syllabus and, you know, some handouts. I never had to hand out paper that way. But at UNG, a lot of people, you have to ask to get a D2L course shell for a face-to-face course, and most people don't. So we had a lot to learn, and our faculty, our classroom faculty had a lot to learn. We also got the mandate from our administration that we should avoid synchronous teaching if possible. So the classroom faculty were to avoid anything synchronous, as were we, just because they were afraid we were going to break the internet and just overtax the system. So that's where we were coming from when we got this word on the Friday the 13th. And so we had to figure out how to take this batch of lemons and make some lemonade. And the first thing we did was figure out what we were up against. And we still had 36 sessions scheduled to be taught through the rest of the spring semester on the books. And those 36 sessions were spread across 4 of our campuses. A lot of the campuses, it was starting to dry up a bit, but at the Gainesville campus, we have faculty that tend to push it well into April. So we still had a lot to tackle. And we really didn't know what to expect. And we just had to think about, now what? So Angela, you want to move to the next slide? So what our now what consisted of, on sort of the back end of things, our librarians reached out to every single instructor who had an instruction session on the calendar. So the first thing we did was reach out to them directly to kind of touch base and see what they were thinking they might want to do, and to offer to them what we could provide. We also redesigned our online request form for our instruction sessions, very just sort of quickly put together, moving from like, what campus do you want on what day, to do you want, they got 2 options: instructional resources in D2L or an online instruction session. And what that online instruction session would look like would be determined by the conversation that the librarian that was assigned would have. Of course, following that mandate, we would try and push them away from synchronous, but it might be that they just wanted us to do what we would have done in the classroom and record it as a video and upload it. The instructional resources for D2L, though, that was more, let us pull some things together for you, put it in a folder in D2L and export that folder so they could import it into their class. So that was the first thing we did, was just kind of reach out and speak to those 36 sessions. I do not remember the number. I should have looked at the number of faculty that involved. But to speak to those folks to say, we are still here, we are still available, we can still teach, and to make those connections. So we also did some marketing things that Angela's going to talk about.
Yeah, so during that 2-week period, we did 2 really important things. Our marketing team created what you see on the screen, which was a Keep Calm series of messages. These were not all of them. There were others about ebooks and databases and things like that. And we immediately began putting these on our front page of our library's website and our social media accounts. And we also, our university had created some really well done COVID-19 support pages. And so library information about how to get research consultation help, how to get in touch with the library, how to access our resources, how to request a class, were all promoted on those pages as well. So after we did our internal communicating with our faculty, we did a lot of external pushes of what we had available. We even got a shout out during one of our faculty staff online town hall meetings from our provost. So we were all holding our breath when she said library, but she said the right things. So, so we had some really good, I think we did a very good job of communicating. I will say that I have a very unique experience with my nursing faculty. We got this call that classes were going to go online, and literally within a half an hour, I had messages from my faculty going, "What are you going to do for us?" So, so that was reassuring that they had a strong desire to have InfoLit in their courses. So during that 2-week period, Amanda did a fantastic job of creating what we called COOP teams, continuing of operations planning, which we divided into 2 different groups. The groups were divided very well by not only skill set, but also skill level. So we had some people on each team that were experts and other people that were novices, so that we could build instruction for our internally that we knew we could, test, drive on each other. So these 2 groups, there was one who was that Amanda led, that was on developing a document called Online Instruction Resources, which basically outlined the different platforms that were available to us, both bought by the university, such as D2L, Collaborate, as well as some free online resources to develop instruction. And then I led the second team, which had 2 deliverables. We were charged with creating a best practices guide for conducting online sessions, and for creating a guide on how to do research consultations. We do have a chat platform. One of the things that we did immediately do was, for the first couple of weeks, everybody was logged into chat to answer questions, because we were anticipating potentially having a large number of people freaking out and asking questions. And then after that initial period, we created a calendar for assigning desk time for our virtual desks and chat. But we have a pretty decently robust research consultation service. And prior to COVID, as Amanda mentioned, almost all our instruction, our research consultations were completely face-to-face. We did have some, mostly graduate students, who were requesting online virtual meetings. So my team spent a lot of time looking at the 2 platforms that are that the librarians knew, which was Skype and Collaborate through D2L. But we also were just being introduced to Teams, Microsoft Teams, when all this happened. So we also created some guides and some best practices for if you wanted to use Teams to do research consultations. After those guides were created, about midweek of the 2nd week of our planning time, we also created 2 other working documents that we're still using. One that lists instruction needs, so that when a faculty member asks for instruction, we're documenting how that's happening and who's doing it. And also a document that's been probably underutilized, but has been useful, at least to me, which is suggestions and discoveries, which means as you're doing something, if you discover a tip or a trick or don't do this, like I turned off my email today before I came live, because email notifications appearing in the midst of things can be distracting. So those kinds of things, that document has been very, very useful, at least to me. So Amanda's going to talk about what our end results have been.
Before I do that, I have to compliment Angela on the group that she led, because I only had like a team of 4 working on our document. Angela's team was like a cast of thousands, and she was really herding cats and did an absolutely wonderful job of it, because we were just talking about resources, but they were talking about, best practices, which is, brings a little more theory into the conversation. And y'all did a great job. And there are several people on this webinar who were part of those teams. So congratulations, y'all did fantastic. And we've saved it. We will be using that as a springboard for really building on those documents as we go on. So yay. in the end, we started off with 36 on the books. We had 1 cancellation, and it was really more for an orientation type thing than an actual instruction session for a class. We got 4 additional requests for spring semester. Of the 39 sessions that we did in the end, only 8 of those were synchronous. So we were able to, for the most part, adhere to the university's requests that we keep things, not live. Some people just really wanted it that way, and we accommodated that, but we were able to kind of steer folks away from that too. We are taking the same approach this summer, as summer, of course, is fully online at UNG. So they made that call in mid-spring, and so we're keeping on. And right now we are planning for fall, and I'm anxious to hear what Christina has to say, because we're thinking about a lot of things. But in all likelihood, we will just continue the way things are going. And I do think that what we accomplished in those 2 weeks and what we've experienced since has been the start of a long-term transformation. And we had planned to work on this, but we were thinking more like a year and not 2 weeks, but making lemonade out of lemons and taking advantage, using COVID as an opportunity instead of a challenge. So we look forward to your questions at the end of this, but that's us. That's what we did.
Great. That is actually really fantastic. I'm going to be a student at UNG in the fall, and I noticed in the student portal lots of those little graphics, and I said they're really doing it right. So I'm thrilled to be able to have you share some of that information with all of us.
Well, thanks, Julius.
Congratulations. We look forward to having you as a student.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I'm a little worried about how fall is going to go with the pandemic and having a full-time job, but it's going to be great.
Who needs to sleep?
Okay, Christina, you are now the host.
Thank you, everyone. So just give me a small second. Okay, well, you're still mic'd in. Can you see what I'm sharing now?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So today I'll be a little bit ambiguous, and that's because when we're thinking about our instruction programs, we're all so unique. For example, KSU had 2 days, technically, to transition online this spring. So every institution has its own choices. And so to that end, this kind of concluding moment is about asking some essential questions and making some essential considerations that will kind of help us make effective choices, or at the very least, effective arguments for what we want our instruction programs and modalities to look like in the fall or even spring semesters. As I'm going along, please feel free to chat in questions, but I'll have a question point at the end as well. So with that, the 2 things I want to bring up for big points of consideration are OSHA's COVID-19 guidelines, as well as the CDC's COVID-19 guidelines, and specifically guidelines for school environments. And then as my team approached its instruction program planning for the fall, and we're almost done with that planning, we asked ourselves, how can our instruction programs actually grow in the fall? I think Amanda and Angela, you two brought up this wonderful point. How can we make lemonade out of lemons? Do we have any opportunities from this? So let's talk about our environments. I looked into this, and according to OSHA, schools are actually categorized as medium exposure environments. And what this means is that there are certain suggested activities and precautions that we should and our workplaces should be taking to protect both employees and our patrons. Specifically, how did we get this medium category, right? Why are we here as opposed to, say, in the low risk category or in the high risk category? Well, schools become medium risk environments when there's frequent or close contact with people. So any campuses that are planning to have in-person classes, that puts us on the path towards medium risk. And then it's that ongoing community transition rate. So for example, I don't think New Zealand has any new cases, last I checked. Their schools would actually be low risk environments because that community transition or transmission isn't really happening at this point. But in Georgia, we do have ongoing community transmission. And so we would be considered a medium risk environment. And what does that mean? Well, OSHA has some suggestions on what we could or should be doing. So a lot of these are pretty straightforward, and I know many of us are thinking about this, but in terms of classrooms, having physical barriers between people, so either between desks or between the instructor podium and students. Funnily enough, OSHA suggests that we distribute masks to individuals who become sick in our classrooms. So if you're really going to have an in-person class, OSHA suggests that you be prepared to provide a mask to someone who may become ill. Now, this is an interesting point because USG is currently not requiring students to wear masks when they come to campus or classes. So that is a consideration for our interactions. Another point that OSHA brought up is that we should really be restricting public access to parts of our worksite if we're going to be going to that worksite. And I know that for a lot of our libraries, this can be really difficult. Most of us kind of sacrifice that back-end space for team members so that students can have more collaborative or study spaces. So now, we have to kind of consider, is there value in blocking certain spaces off from public access? Another point that OSHA brings up is that employers specifically should use as many strategies as possible to reduce face-to-face contact, otherwise known as teleworking. And at the same point, minimizing contact among community members by replacing as many face-to-face meetings with virtual meetings. Now, those last 2 points are pretty interesting for me because one of the big issues that we need to think about for fall is that one may not become sick, but if a family member does, then your team member is going to have to isolate with that family member because of the risks of, transmission spread. So it is probably a good idea to consider that if you are meeting in person, your team members might have much higher rates of absences than they normally do. And my favorite of these suggestions is OSHA's recommendation that all team members be given kind of an update on how to clean things to prevent the spread of COVID. I think we all can clean, right? But what do we need to do specifically to prevent COVID spread? And this kind of brings me to the CDC. OSHA does these large-scale evaluations, and the CDC took it a step further and broke school environments out into 3 categories. Obviously, the lowest risk category being those where we're completely virtual, which many of us over the summer have been able to do, but not all of us. The moderate risk category is interesting. It requires smaller class sizes, prohibiting groups of students from mixing, which isn't usually possible in a college environment. Also requiring students to remain 6 feet apart. And then finally, and this is something that I think we want to consider, students don't share objects. I love think, pair, share activities. I can't be doing a think, pair, share activity in an in-person class anymore, at least not for the foreseeable future. So asking yourself, are there any of your instructional techniques that require closer contact than is appropriate? That's something to consider because once workplace transforms into a high risk category when classes are full-sized, groups of students are mixing, they're not situated 6 feet apart, and they're sharing objects. And so all of this makes me ask, as we consider our programming for fall, I would recommend that we all kind of do a situational analysis, weighing the pros and cons of physical versus virtual environments. And some of the big concerns that my team analyzed were, what is it going to look like to physically return to to a classroom. A lot of KSU's classes are kind of arranged really funny. So for example, our library classroom is very long and skinny, which means that it fits way fewer people if you're socially distancing than is practical. It would drop attendance from like 42 to about maybe 10 to 15 people at most, just because all of the desks are situated so closely together. Additionally, if you are thinking about going online completely, does your team need technology training? Or are your students going to be able to access the materials and programming that you're planning to provide? So are you using too much Wi-Fi or bandwidth is the question. And then we considered current and historical programmatic gaps, as well as campus trends. This one is a really important thing to note. At KSU, our campus is going fully virtual after Thanksgiving, which means that no matter what, we need to have online presence. And with the increase of hybrid and online classes, more and more of our students are learning in online modalities as opposed to in-person modalities. And this final question, which is kind of my benchmark, can we find opportunities for positive changes right now? Which brings me to the questions that my team asked as we began planning for our instruction program. So our first question category was, are there any instructional services that we could adopt in an online environment, perhaps that we were not doing at the time? So embedded librarianship, webinars, course guides, asynchronous tutorials. And a big part of this question is, have you been prevented from expanding into online modalities because of your physical concerns, right? What I mean by that is, if you teach a maximum number of in-person classes, perhaps you don't have time to move into that online environment. Well, maybe now is the time to start expanding into online modes, as Amanda mentioned. From there, my team asked, what would have to happen to move to a fully online environment? And for us, this involves doing things like training our librarians, marketing, and creating policies to help our librarians manage their workloads and our faculty members work with us in an effective manner. And then we asked ourselves, as we were planning for fall, what are the benefits of moving to a wholly online approach to teaching in fall? And for us, we realized that if we focus on in-person classes like we traditionally do, we're actually missing those students who are in fully online classes, and we're kind of taking up a lot of class time for hybrid classes. Additionally, that transition to a fully online mode of teaching partway through the semester means that if we move to fully online for the entirety of the semester, that's actually a more standardized model or approach to our services, which is really helpful both for us in terms of planning, but also in terms of our faculty. They're not going to have kind of, transition questions. And also innovation. We're looking at this semester/year as an opportunity to kind of do things completely differently than normal, because these aren't normal times. And we did ask ourselves, what were the benefits, or what would be the benefits of maintaining in-person services? And there were two things that we noticed. On some campuses, the in-person classes might be kind of prioritized over online or hybrid modes of teaching. And if that's your circumstance, that is a bit of a problem in terms of going to a wholly online mode of teaching. Additionally, if one's campus doesn't have popular use of the course management system, so D2L, for example, it would be difficult to embed online into a class that does not use a course management system. And so these were the questions that my team used to kind of guide our development of an instruction program approach for fall. And what I'd like to do now is ask y'all to chat in some of the questions that you would need to ask in your own environments. And my thought is, perhaps we all have those same questions. Perhaps those questions would help us better analyze our own circumstances. So if you could do that, I'll open the chat right now. And let's see. Okay. And I'm opening the chat and moving it out of your view. Okay, I don't see any questions, so I'll open up the floor to everyone else and stop sharing.
Hi, I have a question.
Sure.
One of the things that came up a couple times in the survey, the registration survey, was how do we get like for how do we get all our librarian colleagues involved, and how do we just kind of support like everybody's learning curve, because everybody's starting in different places, and some people might be wary of certain apps or not know where to start or feel like super overwhelmed. What kind of advice, both for Christina and for everybody else, like what would you advise on how to organize that and just kind of keep spirits up as much as possible?
So I think there are a couple of things going on there. For us, a big kind of like a big carrot for moving to, oh, and I like Amanda's point for face-to-face classes, we may have to do multiple sessions to cover this, like instead of doing one session, you're suddenly doing 3 to hit all the students in a socially distanced environment. And that was part of our consideration. So I will say KSU is moving to a wholly online fall. And that was part of the question, right? How are we going to essentially triple our workload without actually reaching more students than we historically do? And that was a hugely convincing argument for those folks who may not like technology or who may not feel fully comfortable, because pointing out that your traditional 30 to 40 person class is going to be split up into 3 new classes. I don't know about the rest of you, but I don't really want to triple my workload and not reach more students. That would not be good news for me. So that's part of it. Another part is, I think when we talk about moving online, we think about doing webinars like this one, which is actually kind of more technologically advanced than we need to be if we're embedding into a course, D2L, for example. I've said to my colleagues, you could do a PowerPoint and a worksheet in Word. You know how to do those things. And no one's going to see you fiddling around on the back end, because in D2L, that part is completely asynchronous and separated from kind of a live, to succeed or not succeed scenario. I think a lot of us, when we're using new technologies, we're used to doing that in the classroom where someone else is watching us, maybe 30 or 40 someone else's.
Yeah.
And that is unpleasant, right? You don't want to do new things in front of 40 other people who are all sitting there going like, am I even going to bother listening to you if you can't launch your PowerPoint? Well, positively, in a fully online environment, you can set up your course design and your interaction so that it leverages your own technology skills. And so that's our approach at KSU, which is to say, we know that we can all do course guides. We know that we can all do PowerPoints. We know that we can all do reading lists. We have a set of skills that we all share. And let's approach this embedded librarian activity and perspective from that. We all have these skills. So let's focus on those and then expand from there. But it has been a question. And I think this is a good point. Managing hybrid courses is a problem for that reason, that, tripling of work across multiple sections. For us, the big question comes down to, if all students are learning in D2L and we are actually encouraging students to primarily interface with the library through online modalities, doesn't it make a lot of sense to train students how to use libraries and think about information literacy topics in that same environment? For example, if I'm teaching a student how to find books, I like to have them in the library so that they can go find shelf read, right? I mean, it's tough. But if we're not actually having students visit our libraries in the same numbers that they used to, perhaps an online teaching mode will make it easier for them to learn how to use our services and materials. Does that help, Catherine?
It does, and that sounds like a good direction. And I'd also like to hear from Angela, because this sounds like something that you did with your
one of the
spread out
strategies
team.
we did is we took each of the platforms that we identified as the best practice or the best way of doing things or a good way of doing things. We assigned a mentor. So for example, the person who had the most experience in using Teams, she's listed as the mentor. You know, if you end up needing to schedule a research consultation in Teams, she's your, person who can help you learn how to do that, or build your confidence, or give you some practice experience before you do it live with the student. So for each one of our platforms, we assigned 1 or 2 librarians who could be a mentor or a coach. And I think several people have taken advantage of that.
That sounds like a great idea. Okay, so does anybody else have any questions at the moment? I'd like to give Julius a moment to speak, but you can always post any questions in the chat box. And if I don't see any, or comments would be good. So,
yeah, folks, please chat in. I mean, my perspective is y'all might have been grappling with different issues than, each of your presenters today. And so it can be helpful to give voice to those questions and issues.
I have a question for Betsy. And we created a D2L space for our librarians, but it's the place that we're hosting all of our material. As we develop material, it's a place we're sharing our material with each other. It sounds like you have a actual library shell that goes out to all of your students. Is that a campus culture thing, or did you have some issues in getting that established?
I think there was a pretty big push to move everyone into D2L, and culturally most classes automatically get a D2L course page, whether they choose to use it or not. So I think that's the difference between you and me, because you said you all had to request a page, right? To set up the D2L shell page, we needed to kind of work through our little college bureaucracy, but culturally, that kind of environment was already there.
COVID also made it much more pressing. So it was an easier pivot for us. Probably prior to COVID, I mean, even in our discussions, we knew that there would be a lot of bureaucracy involved in trying to get a shell where every student was enrolled. But for us, when I said during the presentation that COVID was an opportunity, it really was, because they wanted to meet the needs of students where they were. So it definitely pushed us to the forefront in terms of getting everybody enrolled.
And I think we were in the same spot as you two, where you said we were really thinking about doing this, but this really pushed us to, actually work through the details.
Okay, I think we really, we have time for, I guess, 1 or 2 more questions. So if anybody has anything to add, Laura, would you like to add anything?
And we got a chat question. So I'm going to intersperse this because I know, Laura, you're from the GHC team, so you might have this answer too. But the question from Amy is, how do you staff the course shell? Are librarians assigned to times to check it?
Yeah, we're all assigned regular reference hours. So just a part of the course of monitoring chat will also monitor the discussion boards.
Okay, that sounds great. Thanks, Amy. So if there's anything else, I guess, you can also contact any of us at any time, but I guess we could just move this over to Julius and see what he has to say and what he'd like to close us out with.
Sure. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So can you all see this?
Yes.
Cool. Okay, I know I stand between you and likely lunch, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what I see as future direction for information literacy in USG, and then open it up for any additional questions, and hopefully we can go have lunch. So there's really two big areas I want to discuss and focus on. One being the COVID-19 and how we're all kind of getting together and learning from each other. And then a little bit about the general education revision and kind of the direction that that is going. So COVID and information literacy. I think that the simple fact we did this webinar today shows that people are wanting to learn from each other. And the system is kind of unique in that we have so many shared resources across in each different library. This kind of discussion leads to librarians learning things from each other, developing good practices, which then hopefully can become best practices. This group, that Information Literacy Working Group, wants to kind of provide a platform and give a voice for USG information literacy librarians to learn from each other and really serve students. So we're hoping that this will kind of kick off and help us build some momentum. Looking at doing something like a series of webinars where I'm eyeing monthly about information literacy as it relates to USG. COVID presents a really unique opportunity in that we are all breaking things, moving fast, learning, innovating, and I think we might want to take a moment, an hour a month, something like that, to just share what's working, what isn't. So if you've done something and you want to share what that is, please email our chair and our chair-elect, being Catherine and Christina. We're hoping to record these and make them available for use now and in the future so we can look back and say, oh yeah, I remember when we broke that thing. So that's kind of the bulk of what I'm hoping the Information Literacy Working Group will do in the future. And I'm hoping that this will become more of a community-led effort, right? Because this is a garden for all of us. And it gives an opportunity to share what's going on, and it provides an opportunity to learn about what's going on at other institutions. Thinking about the general education revision. So this work is still ongoing. They are still meeting and thinking about how to revise the Gen Ed. Significant portions of that work is published online. This link, I am sure, has been emailed to everyone multiple times. If you can, I strongly suggest you look at it and provide feedback. You may have seen this slide. This is the current shape of what the general education proposal looks like, where there's 4 core courses, arts, math, science, history, writing, speaking, data and digital fluency, and social sciences. These aren't necessarily courses per se, but competencies, meaning a student would have to take a course to fulfill the competency in oral communication. Interestingly, it does provide for 3 institutional options. So that's similar to like our Area Bs that we have now. 2 things worth pointing out when you're looking at this. Data and digital fluency could grow into an information literacy type course. And one of these institutional options could also grow into an information literacy type course. But as I said, this is that. So within those core 8 courses, you'll notice that there are embeds here. So the idea is that critical thinking, or this construct of critical thinking plus, is going to be spread throughout, right? We want our students to really think critically, and it's an important element in all the disciplines. But we have information literacy also kind of spread out in some interesting selections of courses. One being math. which is interesting and makes me twitch a little. But then there's social science, science, and of course that data and digital fluency. Worth pointing out, this plan is going to be refined. It's not finalized. It can't be finalized yet. One area that is targeted that will definitely be revised is having a US history course and a political science course to fulfill that legislative mandate. This is a direct quote from our Executive Vice Chancellor, that there is a robust discussion around adding information literacy into written communication. That's our voices being heard. That's all of the librarians who have submitted the feedback. I can tell you in these rooms, in this implementation group, they know that they're going to hear from librarians. And I think that that is something we need to absolutely continue because it makes advocating for it much, much easier. So if you've submitted that feedback and you had that as a comment, thank you for that. The implementation timeline has been pushed back a little bit. So we're looking at fall 2023 to have this up and going. And the revision group is going to be meeting again in the coming academic year. So keep an eye out for emails as this kind of morphs and grows and evolves. And also please submit that feedback because that's really vital and that does help to get our voices heard. Thinking about this gen ed and thinking about having to teach IL and math, I don't know how many of us are experts in how you teach information literacy and math. I am sure there are people who are out there who are like, yeah, absolutely, I know how to do that. I'm not one of them, and I don't know how many of us are. So as we're thinking about this information literacy working group and thinking about COVID spurring communication and sharing of best practices, I'm hoping we'll build on that. And as the new gen ed becomes a little bit more real and a little more defined, that we can use this platform to communicate and share out how information literacy could be taught in all of these areas. What that does for us is it helps us present a more unified and a little bit more streamlined idea of information literacy. We could also band together and work to propose credit courses that fulfill either the data and digital fluency competency or one of the institutional options. So being able to get together and simply have some of these discussions and make some determinations as a group and share really kind of helps us build a united front to go out and do these kinds of things in the future. I want to point out that we do have a listserv, so you don't have to wait for one of these webinars to ask a question. You can email the USG at listserv.uga.edu, and it'll go out. There's about 71 people who have signed up for that listserv already. Most of them are instruction librarians. So if you want to, if you're working through a problem or you don't know how to go about something, please feel free to use this listserv and ask for help and say, hey, how have you all done this? One of the ideas might be sharing, how does your instruction plan look for the fall? And I think getting some discussion there going would really benefit the cause. So if you or a colleague want to be added to that, just send me an email. It's really quick. It should take about 10 minutes to get you added. That's kind of what I had about future directions. I want to just kind of open it up if anyone has questions or ideas about where we can kind of take this group and any have about gen ed. So I can't see the chat, so I'm going to stop sharing that. Okay. So does anyone have any questions or comments?
Looks like we're all thinking about lunch at this point.
I I'm out of coffee, so.
I think
I have to get ready for another meeting.
Thank you very much, Julius, for bringing us up. And I'm especially excited about the reintroduction of information literacy into written communication. But I think also there's, just as an aside, there has been some interesting discussion in mathematical academia, I don't know what the term is, about related to some current events. And that could be about some of the social protests and also about epidemiology and all sorts of things like that. I'm just including that and how we might possibly talk about mathematical information literacy, but that is definitely a webinar for some other time.
I actually have an anecdote for that.
Yes.
So I'm one of the editors on our undergraduate research journal, and we had a mathematician write in, and he was doing disease modeling. It was really fun. So the way he was using research was to get the variables for his equations, essentially, to model the spread of sleeping sickness via fly bites based on one's farming practices with different types of livestock. And so that's where he needed information literacy to, one, be able to find that data, but then to two, understand how to evaluate the accuracy of the numbers that he was selecting, because as we all know, like, disease modeling is only as good as your raw data, right? If you're using bad numbers, they're bad. So I think that's where that conversation is coming from, teaching students to kind of move from those problem sets to actual solutions.
I think it's an exciting opportunity. Do I think we're going to see a lot of library instruction scheduled for math? Unlikely, but I'm here for it, and I'm willing to learn. It will be an exciting new paradigm. So just a final call for any questions. And remember, you can use your mic. You can just go ahead and post something in the chat box. Thank you so much for everybody who's coming. We'll send out an email acknowledging your presence. And again, if you have an idea for a future webinar, please let us know. The purpose of these really is to share across, our institutions and just kind of, sort of sometimes just crane our necks and see what everybody else is doing, because, we all have not wildly, but we often do have very different university constituents that at some point we're using so many shared resources, and, we're working with a lot of the same questions, and it's good to work together with all these things. We don't have to wait for on-site conferences anymore. It's a new time. So anyway, all right. Well, seeing no questions, I guess I feel comfortable saying goodbye and happy lunch, and have a good coffee break, everyone. So thanks again for attending, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Okay. So
Thanks everybody.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.